Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Teedster video. I'm Teddy, and today we're going to be building another Mini-ITX PC. This time I am actually building my own personal updated gaming and editing rig. So I'm going to be building in the DeepCool CH160, which is a Mini-ITX case in white. It's actually not the smallest ITX case that you can find, but it is small enough to accompany everything that I want to put inside of it. Funny story, so the reason why I actually went with this case is because I picked up a AK620 Digital CPU cooler, and that thing is so massive that it wouldn't actually fit inside of my NR200P. So I could put it in there, but I couldn't put on the side panel, so I ended up ordering this off of eBay, which I think it came from overseas from AliExpress, so it took about 2 months for it to get here. I was actually losing hope that it would actually ever show up, but it showed up, so here it is. We'll take a closer look at it and get this build going. But what I really like about this case is the fact that it is still pretty small. It is in all white. I ended up picking up a Gigabyte RTX 5080 Aero OC SFF in white, and all my other components are white, so finding a case that was pure white like this was really important. And then it had to be big enough for me to fit everything I wanted to fit into it. So I'm going to be housing a 9950X3D in here, the 5080. So I really needed something with good enough airflow and with enough options for me to add fans for proper cooling and ventilation. And this case checked all those boxes. Plus, it's also got a tempered glass side panel, which is pretty cool. You don't see a lot of that in ITX cases, and so I really am glad that I got this case in so I can build in it. So watch me disassemble it. So basically there are no like simple tab removal options on this case. Everything is screwed in with these little Phillips head screws. So there are 2 screws that hold on the tempered glass panel and the rear panel, and then there are 4 screws that hold on the top panel, which are on the front and the back side that you can access after removing the side panels. Now once you remove those last 2 screws, you can pop that top off pretty easily, and then you can see inside of the case you've got your power supply extension cable, and then you've got your front panel and your USB front panel motherboard cables that accompany the case. And they are also in white, which is really nice because a lot of these cases you'll find that these cables that come with it are black for some odd reason, even on a white case. So that is very welcome. This bracket is how you attach a 120mm fan to that front side of the cable. I'm just taking it off to get ahead of doing that. So I'm going to be using the Lee SP850 SFX power supply. This is 80+ gold rated and is fully modular. Remove that side bracket. You'll actually take this off and attach this to your power supply, and then you will reattach it, and this is what holds that side of the power supply to the front of the case. Using the provided screws from the box that the case came in, just screw that into the pre-drilled holes on your power supply. Next, just align your power supply to the proper holes. You'll see which ones they do align with because the other screws just don't line up to the proper holes. Once you figured that part out, just use the screws that are provided and attach your power supply to the case. And then do the same thing with those front little bracket screws that you took off, and then your power supply will be fully engaged to the side of the case. You want the fan of your power supply to be facing the outside of the case so that it can pull in cold air from that little opening in the back of the case, and then it will exhaust through that top grill that you can see right there. Next, you can attach all of the cables you're going to need to your power supply. I should have probably done this before I put the power supply in. It would have been a lot easier, but it's still not that difficult to plug these in once you have the power supply installed. Okay, looking at the motherboard we're using, this is the Gigabyte X870i Aorus Pro Ice. It is white, and I've used this in previous builds. It has one PCIe M.2 SSD slot in the front, covered by that giant heatsink, and it's got one on the back. It also has USB 4 capabilities. So oftentimes I'll be using a Thunderbolt dock to transfer files, and it just comes in handy. And other than the motherboard being white, that was one of the deciding factors in me purchasing this. So what I'm doing is I'm taking off the original CPU bracket holder, and I'm going to be installing a thermal Grizzly AM5 contact frame. Now these aren't completely necessary. There have been claims that it will actually help you to gain a couple degrees cooler CPU temperatures. That I'm not 100% sure about, but I'm going to go ahead and just include it because I just had it. I picked it up when I picked up the PTM that I'm going to be using. So there it is. And it's supposed to give just a better contact for your cold plate on your CPU cooler. So there is the Ryzen 9 9950X3D, 16 cores, 32 threads. It also has the 3D V-cache on CCD 0, and then it's got the frequency cores on the second CCD, which is really great for doing multiple things. So it's great for gaming, and it's also really great for multitasking. It is super fast. Now if you're going to be installing this, be very careful. Make sure that the CPU is installed correctly, 100% correctly, and then carefully set this contact frame in around it. And then use the provided screws to go into the original holes for the old retention socket frame. Okay, once you got that installed, and next you're going to be looking at your memory. So I'm running the Team Group T-Create Expert DDR5 desktop memory modules. These are 6,000 megatransfers per second, and it is a 64 gigabyte kit. And they are also in white, and this was about all they had at Micro Center when I went and bought all this stuff. But this memory has been working out really well. It's run stable at the expo speeds, so I can't complain, and it allows me to handle all the tasks I want to handle simultaneously. Next, you'll install the spacers that you're going to need for your air cooler or whatever cooler that you're using. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be using the DeepCool AK620 Digital CPU cooler. For this build, I thought I would forego using the traditional thermal compound and gonna try this phase sheet PTM from Thermal Grizzly. If you haven't seen this yet, this is basically a thermal pad for your CPU or other components that isn't like a, like a grease like you would traditionally use, and it is semi-solid. And what it does is it's a medium to transfer heat from your CPU and into whatever device you're using to cool your component. It is supposed to be more efficient at transferring that heat, and it will result in lower temperatures. Installing it can be a little bit of a pain. So if you're working in like a hot room, it's going to be a lot more flexible and harder to actually get it to peel off of the sheet that it comes on. So I've heard people recommend putting it in the freezer for, an hour, 20 minutes, and it will sort of harden up a little bit, and then it'll be easier to install it. But it's not impossible to do with a regular room temperature PTM. So once I got this installed, I would carefully use an X-Acto knife to cut off the excess. And I mean carefully, so you don't want to dig down and scratch anything off of your CPU. But this contact frame kind of makes it difficult to do. So if you don't have a contact frame, be very, very careful if you're using this PTM when you remove the excess. Also, when using PTM, when you install your CPU cooler, you want to make sure that you set this down gently and as squarely as possible, so that way you're not shifting the PTM around, because once you set it down, you don't want that shifting, because you want that contact to be made all over the surface of your IHS. And once you get your CPU cooler tightened down, go ahead and install your operating system drive. This is SK Hynix Platinum P41. It is 2 terabytes, and it's going to go in your main SSD slot. This is also PCIe Gen 4, but the slot is Gen 5 if you want to throw a Gen 5 SSD inside here. I've opted to swap out the fans that originally came on the cooler for these Thermalright 120mm reverse fan blade with RGB. Because of course you gotta throw RGB on it. So the reason why I chose to replace these and go with these reverse blade fans is because I'm actually doing a kind of reverse intake setup here. So I'm going to be intaking air from the back, and I'm going to be running it through the air cooler, and then I'm going to be exhausting it through the top and the front, which I think if it works properly, you're actually going to be getting the best temperatures on the CPU and GPU, because the CPU is going to be taking in cold air directly from the rear, and then all the hot air from the GPU and the CPU is going to be exhausted from the top and from the front. And from what I've seen so far after having the build finished, it actually is really efficient and keeps everything cool. It also helps with a cohesive look and finish because all of the fan blades are facing the same direction and you don't see any of the nasty back sides of the fans. So that also works out great. And so now we're getting to the really fun stuff, is installing the actual motherboard into the case and then getting all of the various cables plugged in. And if you've got kind of large hands and you're a bigger person like I am, this is always the worst part. So just be patient. Make sure you got everything installed where you want it. Make sure you get your cables out of the way so they don't get stuck underneath the motherboard when you set it in. And then put in the 4 screws that hold the motherboard down onto the motherboard tray. And you can start to see that there's going to be quite a few cables because I'm using 5 fans in this build, and they all have their own RGB cable as well as a PWM fan control speed power cable, so that's going to be fun. But while you're back here, go ahead and plug in your CPU power cable. So to power all of this, I'm going to be using a Montech ARGB and PWM fan controller. It's actually a small hub, so the smallest one that I had that I think it will fit in this build. So what I'm going to do is just run the one PWM control off of the main CPU fan, and then I'm going to run all the fans off of that one PWM header, and that way it keeps everything cohesive and all the temperatures kind of sync up, and all the fan speeds actually will adjust at the same time at the same rate. This helps reduce noise created by turbulence from fans spinning at different speeds, especially in a small case like this. So you guys get to witness firsthand the struggles of plugging in all these cables on a small case with large hands. You can use things like utensils and tools and stuff to help push stuff down, but you want to be really careful as to not damage anything, scratch anything, or sever any of these cables, because if you do, you could cause a lot of damage and potential melting hazard and a fire hazard. Alright, after you get everything plugged into your motherboard, I'm going to go ahead and put the rear intake in. So yeah, it is intaking air, and it's going to go straight through the CPU cooler and then out the top and front. So there's plenty of space in there to get this fan installed. And that's another thing I like about this case, is that it's still small, but you can add so many things to the case to get really, really good cooling performance. It's a tight squeeze, but the front fan on the CPU cooler, get that attached, and then you can start routing your cables kind of around that. It's going to be a tight squeeze, but it all fits and nothing rubs and nothing impedes the fan's movement. So this is a 120 millimeter exhaust fan, and it's a standard blade, and it fits on the top. But what I ended up having to do was kind of shift that side fan on the CPU cooler down a little bit, and shifting the top fan to my left just slightly, so that way we can fit that front 120 millimeter fan on there as well. Now at this stage, you want to start to think about where you're going to be putting all your cables and how you're going to manage it with not having a lot of space. So really on this case, the only space you have for cable management is a little bit in front of your power supply, and then you've got a little bit of space, and then you've got even less space at the very, very top of the case. So you've got to be really, really cautious about your cable management and where you put everything. And at this point, I was really thinking that I wasn't going to have enough space for all these cables. So I'm going to go ahead and start plugging in all of the fans and the RGB headers into this hub and get that pre-wired. So installing that front fan, you want to take that bracket that I took off in the beginning, and you're going to install the 2 screws into your fan. And then once you get those screwed on, you are going to attach that exactly how you took it off and to the front of your case, and then that will hold the fan on. Now, in order to install the GPU with better ease, I recommend taking off this front panel, and that'll give you a little bit of more room to slide your GPU in. And then you can also run these cables kind of where you want them to. And I was so glad that I found this SFF 5080, because I don't think anything else would have fit inside of this case. And it's still a really tight squeeze. I gotta kind of finagle it to get in there. I gotta turn it at an angle and pull the back panel out a little bit, but I got it to fit in. And not too sure if I'm gonna be able to ever get it out, but we'll see if I need to do that later in the future. So you can see there's a good bit of room at the bottom underneath this card, so air can come in easily and it's not going to be smothering itself. So pretty happy with this fit. And then this is the installation of your secondary SSD. So I'm using a Samsung 990 Pro with heatsink, which is a PCIe 4.0 M.2 SSD, and it's another 2 terabytes. So I've got a total of 4 terabytes on this build. So while I'm getting that installed, I'll just go ahead and talk about the cable management a little bit more. So you can see I've got as much cable management as I could possibly do in this case with all those cables. A lot of the cables are not stuffed down behind the CPU cooler, but they are down there, but you can't really see them from the front. And I've got everything zip tied up tight, and I've got the CPU power running down the top frame rail, and then I've got the SATA power cable kind of just going up the back and then routing that, and it was a perfect kind of fit around the power supply without getting, impeding the back panel from being installed. So I was really relieved when I got everything to fit, and you can kind of see there that this was really the best case scenario, and that's the only way I could have got this stuff to fit inside of there. So again, it was pretty meticulous, but just take your time and think about where all your cables are going to go, and then get them all organized and zip tied together and folded properly, and you'll be able to fit everything in this case. So here you can see what I had to do. I explained it earlier about lowering that fan on the CPU cooler to get the fan to fit. So right there, you just lower that down slightly and then it fit properly. So your airflow direction is left to right, exhaust top and front. But all the other cables are ran around the front of the GPU, and some of them are slightly under, but it doesn't hit any of those fans. So all in all, I think it turned out pretty clean and tidy. I love how everything fits in there, and this thing is just a tiny little powerhouse. So I can't believe I got so much power to fit inside of such a small chassis, and with as much cooling potential as I've got to fit in there. So I'm gonna put on the finishing touches and get everything buttoned down, get all the side panels on, and I will see you when I got everything installed and finished. Man, now that I got this thing all put together and it's inside the case and everything fits, I just love how this thing looks. You can't really go wrong with a full white build, and then this thing is pretty unique. I really like how it looks without any lights on. I think that's a really cool, clean aesthetic without the lights on, but you do have the option of having RGB on, and it's all controllable and can sync up. The only thing I can't get to sync up is that LED on the GPU that says Aero. I tried downloading like the Gigabyte RGB control software and I can't get it to recognize it. Signal RGB doesn't recognize it yet, so that's the only thing that is off. But I mean, it's fine. I think it's not an obnoxious color, so just it being white doesn't really detract from the overall appearance of the PC build. But that'll pretty much do it for this episode of building PCs with Teedster. I hope you guys really enjoyed watching the process and me explaining it all to you. If you like videos like this, or you don't want to hear my voice, just let me know down in the comments and I'll try to adjust from there. I got a couple comments about the music choice in some of my videos, saying like it's annoying and So if you've got any suggestions about what kind of music you'd like to hear in my videos, just don't hesitate to let me know. I'm always trying to adjust and do things better and differently. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. Please drop a comment, like, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next build video or possibly the next monitor review. So thank you. Have a great day, and Teedster out.